Dear learners, I welcome you to another session of Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management. We were studying the quantitative research techniques in the last couple of classes. Today, we will be dealing with a new method that's called mixed research method in this module. We studied qualitative methods in detail. In the last few modules, we discussed quantitative techniques and a combination of both, that we use the term mixed research method, and this method is gaining popularity among researchers, and most of the academic journals also give attention to mixed research methods these days. So, this module will elaborate the process, the features and the difference between mixed research method, quantitative and qualitative techniques that usually researchers apply. So, before going into the detail, let us have a quick review of what we studied. Qualitative research, by now you might be very thorough with. It explore the meaning, or qualitative research is a meaning making process, studying perspectives in detail or the culture of communities or individuals' behavior in detail that we study in qualitative research. In quantitative research, we use theories and we test the hypothesis and find the relationship among the variables. Mixed method research is a combination of both qualitative and quantitative, as I said earlier, and it integrates qualitative data as well as quantitative data. Then the design feature specify triangulation, a method that is commonly termed as triangulation. To have a better insight of mixed method research, you may read the book authored by Creswell and Creswell, which speaks about mixed research method, published by Sage. So, let us go into the detail. Here I have given 3 boxes that includes, first one is worldview, this is number 1, and second one is the design aspect, and the third one is the methods. So, just to make you understand, worldview we studied about a post-positivist to constructivist, transformative and pragmatic, the terms which deals with a widely followed principle of the researcher, a term which indicates how a researcher starts the research based upon a particular philosophical understanding, that is worldview. And number 2, we have seen the design, in which we added a new one, that is mixed method here. Here the methods include questions, that is qualitative, then quantitative as well, collecting the data, finally interpretation and validation. So, this works in connection and finally we come to the result. Let me explain this in the next slide properly. In post-positivism, the researchers emphasize reductionism as the principle, and the observation should be empirical in nature and verify the theory. In constructivism, that we widely use in qualitative research, that is understanding the realities and generating theory. Then the next worldview is transformative. Here power and justice, there are different advocacies. So, these advocacies comes into effect, collaborative or change, transformation oriented. Now, when we talk about mixed method, the worldview widely used is pragmatism, that means the consequence of actions, and the real world oriented view. Pragmatic, the term itself say real life. There are 3 types of mixed methods. The number one is convergent mixed methods. In convergent, we find the researcher collect the data at the same time, that is qualitative data and quantitative data is collected at the same time, and then the analysis is done, then relate the findings and comes to the interpretation. The researcher identify common pattern from quantitative and qualitative data, and another interesting aspect is the information is integrated and the overall information is interpreted to come to the findings. So, you can see through this diagram how the process is going on, and I have taken this diagram from the book Creswell and Creswell, and you can find the similar content is mentioned in the text as well. Now, let us see the next, that type is explanatory sequential method. Explanatory sequential mixed method, which include two phases. The first part is collect the quantitative data. Here, after the collection of quantitative data, you have to start the analysis process, and the interpretation that you build will lead the way to collect the qualitative information. So, in the second phase, you will collect the qualitative data, and the results of qualitative data you examine and the final interpretation is made. So, the outcome will be in the phase 1 we have quantitative information, and in the phase 2 you have qualitative information. Then we are going into exploratory sequential mixed method. In exploratory sequential mixed method, we have three phases. In this case, the qualitative data is collected at the first, and then we identify that items will give us way for designing the questionnaire, or we can add a new variable which leads to the third phase, that is quantitative, and in the quantitative results we can compare, and finally we reach into the interpretation. So, the study begins with the findings of qualitative data as mentioned in this particular slide, and the outcome of the research will be useful in many ways because it does not depend upon any particular mechanism. The outcome of the study will be highly useful because it uses both qualitative as well as quantitative data. Let me outline an example of our study. In 2020, me and my research scholar conducted a study to understand the motivation of students to study tourism and hospitality courses. Taking the example from India, we contacted different universities and visited different departments with an intention to interact with the students and collect the data through questionnaire. So, what we did in the beginning we had discussions with the students, and these discussions brought the insight why they want to study a tourism management course or hospitality management course. So, we summarized that information, and from this data we designed a questionnaire. With the help of the questionnaire, we collected the data from different departments in the universities, and ultimately we could get the result after analyzing the qualitative and quantitative information, and we could publish that article in a reputed journal. So, dear students, mixed method research gives you opportunity to understand both the results, that is quantitative and qualitative, how it complements, and it gives you a final interpretation. In this slide, we will study about the features of mixed methods. So, these are emerging methods, and there are different terms as well as different variations emerged from mixed methods as well. We use open-ended questions in the form of interviews and close-ended questions with the help of questionnaire. Then multiple forms of data can be used. Statistical tools we can apply in quantitative, that is questionnaire based survey. Content analysis can be performed on the text data. Then we can do triangulation, that means interpretation is made across the database. So these are the features of mixed methods. What are the checklist? Creswell listed some points that we have to consider while designing a mixed method research. The first point is justify the reason why we need both data, that is qualitative and quantitative data. Because in quantitative studies we see that we follow a theory, and in qualitative we explore the phenomena. So when we use mixed method, the first point a researcher should remember, we should justify, we need both the data formats, and that will give us a better interpretation and help the researchers to reach the research objectives. Then comes the criteria that we use. We have to identify what criteria is required for our study. Then the way you conduct the study, the research design and strategy should be provided through a visual model. Normally we do not find a visual model in many research papers, but in case of mixed method, a visual model, a diagrammatic presentation should be shown to indicate the research strategy. The procedure of data collection should be mentioned clearly. The sampling procedures, you should have a clarity on sampling procedures, and it should also be mentioned in your research paper or dissertation. Then next point is specific analysis procedures, data analysis procedures you have to explain. And then the last, it is the validation of the findings have to be explained. So with this, if you follow the listed items, if you follow this checklist and you describe things in order, you can go ahead with a mixed method study. So when we talk about quantitative research or mixed method, one thing in common is we have to use statistical test. So dear learners, those students who are not from statistics, don't be scared about the names which I am using here. You can learn it slowly. Those students from science, math or statistic background, they might be already knowing about what I am talking on. So we have two major forms of test that called parametric and non-parametric test. So this depends upon the kind of data that you have. If we have normal data and if we have our variables are metric variables, we use parametric test. So I am not going into the detail about this test, just make you familiar with the terms. Just remember that non-parametric test, the terms that we use common is chi-square test, McNemar, Kruskal-Wallis, Wilcoxon rank test and PLSM. These all are falling under non-parametric test group. So what is parametric test? These are t-test, ANOVA. So various tests which have stringent assumptions to follow, because there are certain assumptions when you apply a test. I told you about the normality of data or sampling procedure, probability sampling procedures, the type of variable that you are using, that all matters here. So parametric tests are more stringent in terms of following the assumptions. It will give you more precise result. And there is another type of test which we use with the multivariate. Multivariate analysis are having multiple variables that we analyze simultaneously. Examples: exploratory factor analysis called EFA, cluster analysis, discriminant analysis, multidimensional scaling, etc. So students who are in the PhD level may pay attention to this test which I am talking about. If you are using quantitative or mixed methods, you have to study or you should know how to use this test and interpret the results. We have few more advanced statistical tools that we can say conjoint analysis, multiple regression, covariance based structural equation modeling. These levels are far advanced, and for a graduate student is concerned, this may not be easy for you at this point of time, but I recommend this for the PhD scholars. For students at the graduate level, you can study or you can work out on the basics of statistics and try to make an attempt learning the basics of chi-square test, t-test, or the introduction of factor analysis or cluster analysis. These are very interesting too. So, I hope by learning, by having an understanding on statistical test, because in our next level, 7th week of our class, we should have an idea what kind of test that we are using and how we are going to interpret the result. The choice of statistical techniques depends upon what purpose that you are using it. Are you using it for data reduction? That means reduce the data. I suggest you can go ahead with exploratory factor analysis, EFA, or you can use cluster analysis. If it is meant for model testing and model validation, go for structural equation modeling. You may go for CBSEM, that is covariance based, or partial least squared, PLS-SEM. The next aspect is scale development and validation. This involves a complex procedure. If you want to advance your research skills, you can start paying attention to developing scales and validation of scales. If you wish to work with the secondary data, panel data would be helpful. Or time series analysis, another analysis which researchers use with the help of secondary data. I would like to compare qualitative techniques and quantitative techniques here. The features are listed here. You can see one is context specific, the second one is more data centric. So, data in the sense of numbers, qualitative in the form of text, visuals, photograph, video, etc. The perspective is examined in qualitative analysis. We create narratives and we come to the interpretations. In quantitative research, we identify hypothesis and we test it, and then we come out with the specific inferences. Qualitative researches are inductive, whereas quantitative researches are deductive in nature. The qualitative researcher depends upon reflexivity to validate the result, whereas the quantitative researchers, they have already threshold values established and standard parameters are already set. So, here subjectivity is one of the issue with the qualitative research, but to make it more prompt, assumptions have to be followed in statistical test, or we need to get precise answers, we have to stringently follow the assumptions. Qualitative researchers use low samples numbers, less sample size can work, but in quantitative researches we should have more sample size. Now, I would like to give you some reading, recommended reading here. If you have time, for a researcher is concerned, the following publications will help you to gain insight of some topics which I did not mention earlier. I suggested a reading material here, combined visual analysis. This is published in European Management Review. Here you will find the author followed an analysis which is mentioned here, semiotic analysis. So, the author conducted a study in which 3 different analyses have been used, but the outcome is based mainly on the interpretation of semiotic analysis. And the second one is an interesting experience shared by a writer. The title of the work is The Poetics of Tourist Experience. Here autoethnography, a family trip experience is shared in a journal that is named Journal of Tourism and Cultural Exchange. Now, another advanced reading material is participant observation and in-depth interviewing conducted by a researcher called Jennifer, in which the airfare and satisfaction, there were two observation aspect. So, Malaysian low cost airline was one of the main context of the study, where the author identifies that if the fare is low, customers do not bother about the additional services, and the matter of dissatisfaction, it may not last for long, it is only temporary. Just imagine our case, we want to save the time and we can compromise with some services even it is not available. If it is an additional service, if a paid service, we ignore it. So, this study is different from other studies because satisfaction, a term which we use, normally researchers in this area are quantitative researchers. So, now another research I would like to recommend you is Dream Now, Travel Later, a recent research which speaks about online destination experience and how we go through different websites and before we plan a trip, and what extent this visit of websites motivate us to conduct a trip in the forthcoming days. Speaking about mixed method research, I would like to recommend a publication by Michel. This is very important to know that this particular publication is highly interesting because the author used a term called abduction. We earlier heard about deduction, we also heard about induction, but what does it mean by abduction? Abduction refers to exploring theory and data. So, let us see in the next slide a comparison of these three different approaches. One is induction, second one is deduction, and third one you can see abduction. So, four different parameters I have mentioned in the left: logic to theory. So, here in induction that we use in qualitative studies, here we use the known things and we try to come to conclusions without doing any kind of test. That is what is mentioned here, untested conclusions. When it is deduction, we come to conclusions using test, and normally it must be true too. When the premises are true, means the theory, if it says something, what we do analyze and what we do the study, that outcome of the study also match with the theoretical premises. In abduction, we can also use the premises and we can test. It is not like mandatory the outcomes should be the same. We can test and reach into conclusions. So, in induction, the generalization of a study that comes from specific context. In deduction, generalization happen, that means you conduct the survey and the survey respondents outcomes that is analyzed, we come to generalization. Here this include both interaction between specific and general, that means qualitative interviews and the quantitative data. Then in terms of abduction, the use of data, how it is used, identify the pattern and the conceptual framework is located within that pattern, and finally it goes to the data collection process. Therefore, that we have seen explanatory sequential research method or exploratory sequential research method. So, the outcome, the theory generation is concerned. In abduction, theory generation and modification is possible, whichever is appropriate. I recommend you to read the publication mentioned here, Michel. So, you will have a better idea about induction, deduction and abduction, these three different approaches. So, dear learners, we have gone through very intense detail of quantitative researches, and we have also seen mixed method researches. And I am sure that you got some interesting outcomes while doing these mixed research methods. Once again, I recommend few reading material for you. This will help you to gain a better insight on quantitative research techniques, because in this week we were dealing with the quantitative research techniques, and the publications which I refer here, it deals with destination image and it also deals with the place attachment, crowding. These aspects are highly relevant and useful in the present research scenario. So, for the research scholars, if you go through these articles, this will give you a very good insight on how the authors used quantitative research techniques to present their findings. So, in conclusion, I would like to draw your attention to what we discussed today. We have seen mixed method research, we have seen the features, and we have gone through the details, and we have seen how it is different from qualitative and quantitative research methods, and we have gone through some examples of publications which detailed specific techniques, that is qualitative, quantitative and mixed methods. And I also introduced a new term to you, that is abduction, a term used in mixed method proposed by an author called Michel. So, if you are in the early stage of your research, you may think about the research design and the techniques that you are going to follow. I hope this lecture was useful for you. If you have any doubts, please come back to me. Thank you.